followed by a translunar injection burn. We're getting an update now from NASA Launch Control. NASA's launch team reports that they believe they only have a few minutes of work left to do in order to catch up with the countdown sequence. The upper stage has been fully loaded now with its liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen supply. And the mission management team is set to meet in just about 3 minutes or so to poll NASA managers on their readiness to proceed into the terminal countdown. That'll be followed by the launch readiness poll by Charlie Blackwell Thompson. You can see a view inside NASA reports that they're still expecting a target launch time to be set somewhere around 1:45 to 2 a.m. Eastern Time. But no specific launch time has been set yet. Another constraint that the NASA managers are weighing as they determine a new target launch time are cutouts in the launch window. There are 40 so-called COLAs, or collision avoidance cutouts in the window. They range from just a couple of seconds in length up to about 2 minutes in length. So there are 40 cutouts that are in the launch window that are set at specific times to ensure that the rocket, both the core stage as it flies through space, as well as the upper stage and Orion as they fly through space, don't get too close to any other object in orbit. These calculations are made with the assistance of the flight dynamics team at NASA's Johnson Space Center, as well as data from the U.S. military, which tracks all objects in Earth orbit. Now less than 2 minutes remaining until the poll of the mission management team for terminal countdown operations and launch. NASA Test Director Jeff Spaulding just reported there are no constraints to launch at this time.
proceed at this time.
I copy all entity. At this time, I will proceed with my poll. And attention on 232, this is the launch director performing the final poll for launch. Verify no constraints and go for launch. EGS Program Chief Engineer.
EGS Program Chief Engineer verifies that the EGS, SLS, and Orion Program Chief Engineers have no constraints and are go for launch.
Copy, Greg. Thank you. EGS Chief Safety Officer.
The EGS CSO verifies the SLS, Orion, and EGS CSOs have no constraints and are go for launch.
Copy, John. Thank you. Range weather.
Weather has no constraints and weather is go for launch.
Copy, LWO. And mission manager. And mission manager, launch director.
Launch director, mission manager on 232. The mission management team has been polled. You have a go to proceed with terminal count and launch of Artemis 1.
I copy all. Thank you. And entity, launch director.
Go ahead, Launch Director.
Yes, sir. On behalf of all the men and women across our great nation who have worked to bring this hardware together to make this day possible, and for the Artemis generation, this is for you. At this time, I give you a go to resume count and launch Artemis 1.
Copy, Launch Director, and thank you. All right, we do have a couple of steps to configure, and then we will be ready to resume the clock. CVSE, NTD.
CVSC here.
Initiate recording of Orion cameras at this time.
In work.
NTD.
RSR here.
Perform the booster ignition SNA arm rotation enable.
NDT, RSR, booster ignition SNA arm and rotation enable is complete.
And I copy. Thank you. All right, and all personnel, we are going to resume the clock here momentarily.
You've been listening to the voices from Launch Control, NASA Test Director Jeff Spaulding and Launch Director Charlie Blackwell Thompson. All stations polled go for the terminal countdown and go for
no
launch.
cutouts at this time. And
We're
all
standing
personnel,
by for the countdown clock to resume.
GLS, you can resume the clock on your mark.
GLS copies. Countdown clock will resume on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark.
T-minus 10 minutes and counting.
T-minus 10 minutes and counting.
The ground launch sequencer has taken control of the countdown. The ground launch sequencer is commanding the final 10 minutes of the countdown.
Show 06:47:44 is the new liftoff time.
Affirm.
Okay.
T-minus 8 minutes and 30 seconds. We're going to be hearing periodic call-outs from members of the launch team for the remainder of the countdown this morning. The launch time is targeted for 1:47 a.m. and 44 seconds. That's the exact time of liftoff, 1:47:44 Eastern Time, 6:47:44 UTC.
purging the aft skirt booster with high flow nitrogen.
T-minus 7 minutes and 10 seconds. Coming up at T-minus 6 minutes, the Orion spacecraft will be transitioned to internal power. The Orion spacecraft's ascent abort pyros are also being armed at this slide.
GLS is go for core stage tank pressurization.
And we've heard the call that the ground launch sequencer is go for core stage tank pressurization.
GLS is go for FTS arm.
Now inside of 5 minutes remaining
GLS
until
is go
launch
for
time.
LH2 high flow bleed check.
We've heard calls in the last couple of minutes that pressurization is underway on the core stage propellant tanks. NASA has confirmed that the 4 RS-25 engines are conditioned for launch. They're at the proper temperatures.
GLS is go for core stage APU start.
Now the 4 core stage auxiliary power units, or KPUs, are being fired up at the launch pad. These are the hydraulic power systems that power the steering mechanisms on the 4 RS-25 engines at the base of the core stage. In the next few moments, we should see the steering profile check of the 4 RS-25 engines.
GLS is go for purge sequence 4.
For the call from the ground launch sequencer controller that they are go for purge sequence 4. Inside of 3 minutes until launch. Pressurization now underway on the core stage liquid oxygen tank. T-minus 2.5 minutes And there we have the engine steering profile check on the core stage, the KPUs, the core stage auxiliary power units, driving thrust vector control actuators to check the steering profile of the RS-25 engines. These 4 engines will generate about 500,000 pounds of thrust apiece, burning a liquid
GLS
oxygen
go for upper
and
stage
liquid
to
hydrogen.
internal power.
T-minus 1 minute, 40 seconds. The core stage will be transitioning to internal battery power momentarily.
GLS go for core stage to internal power.
T-minus 60 seconds, 1 minute remaining until the launch of NASA's Artemis 1 lunar test flight. Mission Control in Houston will take control of the Orion spacecraft and the launch after liftoff. At T-minus 30 seconds, the ALS, the Autonomous Launch Sequencer on the Space Launch System, will take control of the countdown from the Ground Launch Sequencer.
GLS is go for ALS.
And there's the transition to Automated Launch Sequencer, 30 seconds to go. Ignition of the 4 RS-25 engines is planned at T-minus 6 seconds.
20. 15.
T-minus 10 seconds. Igniters have fired.
Core stage go inertial.
There's the sound suppression water system. RS-25 ignition. Booster ignition. Liftoff of the Space Launch System.
Copy liftoff.
Port 109 on the way to the moon.
HPS Camaroo's flight phase. Copy. Good target, AMT low. Copy, AMT low. Good control on the roll. Copy, roll.
Space Launch System marking toward the east from Kennedy Space Center. 8.8 million pounds of ground-shaking thrust.
30 seconds into flight Artemis 1. First milestone, forward view past the max Q, about 1 minute.
We're hearing a big rumble here at the press site about 4 miles from the pad.
SLS now traveling 607 miles per hour. You're looking at 8.8 million pounds of maximum thrust. Quiet here in the loops in mission control. The 4 core stage engines are throttling down ahead of passing through max Q. Now 1 minute, 21 seconds into the flight, traveling at 1,420 miles per hour. The 4 core stage engines are back at maximum thrust. The next major milestone will be for the solid rocket boosters to cut off and jettison at about 2 minutes and 11 seconds into the flight, so about 30 seconds from now. Again, quiet here in Mission Control Houston as teams continue monitoring.
Hope you enjoyed the sounds of the powerful solid rocket boosters on the Space Launch System. We're now about 20 seconds from the expected burnout of the 2 solid rocket boosters. They will jettison to fall into the Atlantic Ocean. They will not be recovered
Standing
on
by
this mission.
for solid rocket booster jettison and shortly thereafter.
That should be SEP. Copy SEP. 4 at 109. Core stage last segment.
There is
Copy.
burnout and
Close loop
jettison.
guidance
Both
converge.
solid rocket
Copy
boosters
CLG.
have separated
Confirmation that the solid
from
rocket
the Space
boosters
Launch
have
System.
separated.
How's the
These
forward
are
link?
77
Forward
foot
Forward
core
link,
boosters.
stage engines
GC.
continuing to fire.
Why we don't see a forward link on board?
LCD
strings are swapping back and forth for
RS-25 engines
their
firing,
Okay.
traveling over 3,400 miles per hour, 46
Performance
miles
nominal.
downrange.
Copy nominal. Do we need to switch over to KUS? Would that be better?
Yeah, we
Those
can.
engines
minutes and
burning at
36 seconds into
109%
flight.
of rated
Right.
performance.
Hearing
as
nominal
expected.
calls here in Mission Control Houston. We've still got 4 good engines on the core stage. Next up, we'll be looking for the service module fairing to separate. This is 3 15 by 15 foot fairing panels, providing structural support, protecting the service module. Those will separate at about 3 minutes and 11 seconds into flight, and very shortly thereafter will be followed by the launch abort system separation. Just over 3 minutes into the flight of Artemis 1, now traveling over 4,060 miles per hour, 83 miles downrange. We just had
3
confirmation
minutes,
that the
15
service module
seconds
fairing
into the
has
flight.
separated.
We've heard confirmation from Mission Control Houston that the service module aerodynamic fairings have jettisoned.
And that the launch abort system pyros have fired, separating those from Orion
And we've
as
heard
well.
confirmation from
For
MCC
future crew
Houston that the launch abort system motor
G-Flight
jettisoned
Pilot
is
radar
fired.
reports 3 good panels gone.
Copy.
GPS acquisition.
Roger.
SM prop priming complete. 3 engine press.
Copy. 3 engine press.
Like good antennas, we still
We
don't
just
have
heard the
forward
call for
link.
3
We have
engine
handed
press,
up the
meaning
TITRS.
if SLS
All right,
were to
GC,
lose an
are we,
engine at this point in the mission,
getting that
we can
forward
still
link to
achieve
TITRS
a
now?
nominal mission.
We have
We
no
would just
issue on
have
the
an
ground.
extended
We're gonna
main engine
continue to
cutoff
jet.
time. However,
Copy.
we still have 4 good engines, all at maximum thrust right now, powering
There's
the
something
first
on
flight
board
of
going
Artemis
on,
at
Nico?
5,200
Why, we
miles
just got
per
luck.
hour, 148 miles downrange.
Four minutes, 10 seconds into the flight. We're about halfway through the core stage's performance on this Artemis 1 test flight. No issues
We're 4 minutes
reported
and 16 seconds
so far
into the
in
flight
this
of
launch.
Artemis 1.
For RS-25
So far,
engines
we've
continue
had
firing.
a clean ascent.
A clean
We saw
ascent
those solid rocket boosters
reported from
jettison
Mission
about 2
Control
minutes
in
and 11
Houston.
seconds after liftoff. Shortly after, we had the service module panels fairings separate, as well as the launch abort system. The launch abort system was inert for this flight, except to perform this separation. Those 4 core stage engines will continue to fire and power the flight of Artemis 1, now traveling over 6,800 miles per hour, 229 miles downrange. Booster flight controller reports that the engines are looking good.
5 minutes into the flight, 3 minutes remaining in the
Our core
stage
stage
burn.
main
All
engine
4
cutoff
engines
time is about 8
continue
minutes
firing.
and 3 seconds. We are now at 5 minutes and 11 seconds into the flight, 7,656 miles per hour. Again, 4 good core stage engines, those 4 RS-25 engines. The last time those core stage engines flew, they were taking space shuttles to orbit, and now with upgraded capabilities, they're launching the future of human spaceflight.
4 minutes or 5 minutes, 40
5 minutes,
seconds
42
into
seconds
the flight.
into the mission. We are now traveling
Velocity
8,800
now
miles per hour,
8,800 miles per hour,
345 miles
345
downrange
miles
from the launch pad at
downrange.
Kennedy Space Center.
Everything looking good. A little more than 2 minutes remaining in the core stage burn.
Again, we are anticipating core stage main engine cutoff at about 8 minutes and 3 seconds. And about 10 seconds later, we'll see core stage separation, at which point Orion and the interim cryogenic propulsion stage will be
Space Launch
flying
System
free.
core stage engines continue to be visible from our location here at Kennedy
Now
Space
traveling
Center
over
on the
10,000
eastern
miles per
horizon.
hour, 6 minutes and 15 seconds into the flight of Artemis 1, 427 miles downrange. Quiet here on the
A
loops in Mission
starlight
Control Houston. Teams
beacon
continue
on
to
the
monitor
eastern
this
horizon
first
as
flight.
the Space Launch System continues downrange. Plus 6.5 minutes.
About a minute and a half now until that core stage main engine cutoff time. Our 4 core stage engines continue to fire at maximum thrust.
Here's a neat animation from NASA showing what the current configuration is of the Space Launch System. The 2 boosters jettisoned, as we saw a few minutes ago. All 4 engines on the core stage continue firing.
Coming up on 7 minutes since launch today, now traveling over 12,800 miles per hour, 563 miles downrange. Again, still quiet here in Mission Control Houston.
miles downrange. Artemis 1 has now disappeared from view behind some clouds just above the eastern horizon.
As we prepare for main engine cutoff, the 4 RS-25 engines are beginning to throttle down. 30 seconds now until core stage main engine cutoff. All 4 engines continue to throttle down.
The 4 RS-25 engines are throttling down to maintain a constant acceleration
now 7 minutes,
on the
45
vehicle.
seconds into the flight,
As we
traveling over
approach main engine
16,000 miles
cutoff,
per hour.
16,000 miles per hour, the current velocity.
Continuing to hear good calls here in Mission Control, Houston. We're standing by for core stage main engine cutoff.
MECO, main engine cutoff.
Earth orbit config segment. MECO. Copy MECO.
And we have confirmation of core stage main engine cutoff.
FIDO.
Orion,
Nominal MECO
is now
flight.
in
Copy
Earth's
nominal
orbit. The flight dynamics officer reports that we have a nominal main engine cutoff. And we just heard the call for core stage separation. That means Orion and the interim cryogenic propulsion stage are now flying free from the core stage of the Space Launch System. The next milestone will be solar array deployed approximately 18 minutes after liftoff. But before Orion stretches its wings,
Jeff, it's nominal MECO. Nominal MECO.
At this point, the ICPS, the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, and Orion are in a preliminary orbit around the Earth. In this orbit, at least according to predictions, the spacecraft should be in an elliptical orbit ranging between about 16 nautical miles and more than 900 nautical miles in altitude. That low point or perigee is within Earth's atmosphere. That's why the RL-10 engine on the upper stage needs to ignite at about 53 minutes or so after launch for what's called a perigee raise maneuver to raise that low point or perigee above the atmosphere. That'll put the Orion spacecraft in a stable orbit. Right now, the core stage, which has been jettisoned, as well as the ICPS and Orion, are on a trajectory that would result in a splashdown in the Pacific Ocean after completing nearly one orbit of the Earth. So this upper stage